Do you have a loved one who went missing or was murdered while traveling abroad? Is your family still searching for answers? At the Last Trip podcast, we believe these stories deserve to be heard. We want to amplify your voice, share your loved one's story, and help bring awareness to their case. If you are a family member or friend of someone who vanished or lost their life while traveling, we want to hear from you. Your story could help spark new leads, keep their memory alive, and push for the justice they deserve. Reach out to us at thelasttrippodcast@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram at thelasttripcrimepod to share your story. Together, we can shine a light where it's needed most. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. If you haven't already done so, please make sure the volume of this podcast is set perfectly to your listening enjoyment. Please take your seat, whether that's on the treadmill, car, sofa, or bed, and buckle in for the last trip. My name is Jamie Beebe, and I'll be your tour guide, recreating someone's last days in paradise. On behalf of myself and everyone behind the scenes, please enjoy the Last Trip podcast. And because nobody likes a long flight to get to where they want to be, let's prepare for takeoff. Money, power, and mystery. 3 ingredients for a disappearance that still haunts the Pacific. Larry Hillblom was no ordinary businessman. As the co-founder of DHL, he helped create a global shipping empire, amassing incredible wealth. Despite his millions, he chose to live in isolation on a remote Pacific island, surrounded by secrecy, scandal, and whispers of something darker. Then, in 1995, his small plane went down in the ocean near Saipan. Wreckage was found. Other passengers' bodies were recovered. But Hillblom? He was gone. No body, no trace, just questions. Did he really perish in those waters? Or was this the ultimate escape for a man with everything to lose? With mounting paternity lawsuits, a carefully worded will, and a fortune up for grabs, his disappearance set off one of the most bizarre and scandalous legal battles in history. Was it an accident? A cover-up? A murder? A vanishing act? Today, we dive into the strange, tangled mystery of Larry Hillblom, a man whose empire spanned the world, but whose final fate remains unknown. Saipan, the largest of the Northern Mariana Islands, has long been a place of escape. For tourists, it's a hidden gem in the Pacific, a tropical paradise boasting crystal-clear waters, rugged cliffs, and untouched beaches. But beneath its postcard-perfect surface, Saipan has a history of war, intrigue, and dark secrets. It's the kind of place where people can disappear, sometimes in the thick jungle, sometimes beneath the waves, and sometimes, perhaps, by design. For Larry Hillblom, the billionaire co-founder of DHL, Saipan wasn't just a place to visit, it was a place to live. But why would someone with nearly unlimited resources choose this remote island as his home? The answer isn't just in its beauty, though that certainly played a part. When Larry arrived in the early 1980s, Saipan was in transition. Officially, it was a U.S. territory, but in many ways, it operated like its own lawless outpost. The CNMI, Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, had cut a deal with the U.S. government, allowing it to maintain control over its labor and immigration laws, while still benefiting from American military protection and economic ties. This created a loophole that attracted businessmen, factory owners, and billionaires like Larry. By the 1990s, Saipan had become a booming garment industry hub. American companies set up sweatshops on the island, exploiting cheap labor without having to abide by U.S. labor laws. Thousands of workers, mostly young women from China, the Philippines, and other Southeast Asian nations, lived in overcrowded conditions, making clothes labeled "Made in the USA" while earning next to nothing. Saipan's nightlife catered to businessmen and visitors looking for more than just a tropical getaway. Bars, brothels, and hidden gambling dens flourished, often with connections to powerful local figures. Wealthy expats and investors, men like Larry, could live like kings, protected by a system that turned a blind eye to their personal lives. For tourists, Saipan offered an entirely different world, one of breathtaking natural beauty and historical intrigue. Today, Saipan is a haven for adventurers, history buffs, and those looking to escape the crowds of more mainstream destinations. Its white sand beaches rival those of Hawaii and Bali, but without the over-tourism. Divers and snorkelers come to explore the stunning coral reefs and sunken World War II wrecks, ghostly reminders of the island's violent past. For those fascinated by history, Saipan is like an open-air museum of war. During World War II, it was the site of one of the most brutal battles in the Pacific. American and Japanese forces fought ferociously, leaving behind bunkers, bomb craters, and Banzai Cliff, where hundreds, perhaps thousands, of Japanese soldiers and civilians leapt to their deaths rather than surrender. Even today, visitors claim to hear strange whispers in the wind. And some say they've seen shadowy figures moving along the cliffs at dusk. And then, of course, there's the mystery of Larry Hillblom. Larry wasn't just another rich man looking for a beachfront mansion. He wanted freedom from American tax laws, from corporate oversight, and perhaps even from the constraints of morality. In Saipan, he could operate outside of prying eyes, building his fortune, indulging his preferences, and creating his own version of paradise. But was it paradise? His estate was isolated, surrounded by thick jungle, and perched high above the crashing waves. He kept a small circle of trusted associates, lived with his much younger girlfriend, Josephine, and traveled frequently by plane and boat to even more remote islands in the Pacific. For those looking for something beyond the usual tourist attractions, Saipan offers eerie reminders of its past and the kind of mysteries that keep people coming back. Visitors can explore the grotto, an underwater cave system where light dances eerily through the blue waters. Some divers have reported feeling an unexplained presence, as if someone or something was watching them from the darkness. There's Ladder Beach, once a private escape for Japanese officers, where visitors claim to hear the distant echoes of wartime radio transmissions late at night. Then there's Forbidden Island, a jagged rock formation off the coast that locals say is cursed. According to legend, spirits guard the island, punishing those who attempt to stay overnight. The dangerous currents surrounding it make it nearly impossible to reach, and even harder to leave. Perhaps it's fitting that Saipan, with its mix of beauty and mystery, was the place Larry chose to call home. A place where a billionaire could live like a ghost in his own lifetime. A place where, after his disappearance, his secrets could be swallowed by the sea. But to truly understand why Larry Hillblom chose Saipan, why he built his life in this remote paradise, why he surrounded himself with secrecy, and why his disappearance still fuels speculation, we need to go back to the beginning. Who was Larry Hillblom before the billions, before the planes, before the scandals? How did a small-town boy from California rise to power? And what led him down a path that would ultimately leave his legacy entangled in mystery, lawsuits, and unanswered questions? To uncover the truth, we have to start at the very beginning, long before Saipan became his sanctuary, and long before he became a ghost.
Hello, hello. I'm Courtney, and this is The Book of the Dead, a true crime podcast based out of New Jersey. For those looking for a podcast that focuses on the victims and who they were, or cases where the family is directly involved in the telling of their loved ones' stories, each chapter of this podcast is dedicated to the victim they feature. Here, you can find cases you may have never heard of, or interviews with experts that have dedicated their lives to protect and serve, and occasionally hear from the victim themselves. So get comfortable, grab a drink, and settle in for another chapter of the Book of the Dead.
Larry Lee Hillblom was born on May 12, 1943, in Kingsburg, California, a small farming town in the Central Valley. Even as a child, Larry had a restless energy, always on the move, always thinking ahead. His mind worked differently. Where others saw the world as it was, Larry saw possibilities, opportunities waiting to be uncovered. He was never one to follow the crowd, instead choosing to forge his own path, one that would eventually lead him to becoming a billionaire, an eccentric recluse, and a man whose disappearance remains shrouded in mystery. Larry idolized Howard Hughes, fascinated by the billionaire's secrecy, unpredictability, and ability to operate in the shadows, always one step ahead of everyone else. Larry himself adopted a similar lifestyle. He was known to vanish unexpectedly, sometimes for days at a time, leaving his friends and family wondering where he had gone, only to reappear later as if nothing had happened. He seemed to relish keeping people on their toes, never letting anyone get too close or predict his next move. Raised in a strict Lutheran household, Larry attended Concordia Lutheran Church and Kingsburg High School. His intelligence was evident early on, and he pursued higher education at Reedley College and then Fresno State. He earned a law degree from the University of California, Berkeley's Bolt Hall School of Law. During this time, he briefly clerked for the famous San Francisco attorney Melvin Belli. But Larry had little interest in a traditional legal career. He had grander ideas. In college, Larry was an oddity. He didn't care about appearances. He slouched when he walked, dressed like a small-town farm boy, and showed little concern for money. He was always broke, scraping by to make ends meet. To support himself, he took up a peculiar side job, transporting legal documents overnight from San Francisco to Los Angeles. Each night, he would take the last flight to LA, deliver the documents, and then catch the first flight back in time for his morning classes. He did this 5 nights a week. It was exhausting, but Larry saw something others didn't: a gap in the market, a business opportunity waiting to be seized. That idea became DHL. In 1969, at just 26 years old, Larry co-founded DHL alongside Adrian Dalsey and Robert Lynn. The world had no faxes, no emails. If businesses needed to send urgent documents, they had to rely on the slow-moving postal service. But Larry found a way around it. He approached the Matson Navigation Co., a shipping company that had just introduced new, faster cargo vessels between the U.S. coast and Hawaii. The ships were so fast that their shipping documents couldn't reach Hawaii in time to use traditional mail services. Larry offered a solution. He would purchase airline tickets and send their documents with passengers, ensuring they arrived before the ships did. Other companies quickly caught on, and soon, DHL was born. DHL revolutionized the industry, challenging the monopoly of the U.S. Postal Service. When the USPS tried to shut him down, Larry fought back and won. His company grew rapidly, expanding globally and making him incredibly wealthy. But wealth didn't change Larry. It only made him more enigmatic. By the 1980s, Larry had all but vanished from the public eye. He left the corporate world behind and moved to Saipan, a U.S. Commonwealth in the Pacific, drawn by its lax tax laws and the promise of a life unrestricted by government oversight. But there was something else about Saipan that appealed to Larry. He could get away with far more than he ever could in the United States. He spent his days investing in businesses across Asia, pouring millions into projects in Vietnam, the Philippines, and Hawaii. He restored the Dalat Palace Hotel in Vietnam, rebuilt its golf course, and invested in luxury resorts. But he always operated in the shadows, using overseas holding companies to bypass American trade restrictions. He had become a true international businessman, one who played by his own rules. Despite his wealth, Larry remained eccentric. He collected vintage planes, but never bothered to get a pilot's license. He would fly his aircraft recklessly, often neglecting maintenance, treating them like toys rather than serious machines. His reckless approach to flying nearly cost him his life in 1993 when one of his vintage planes crashed near Saipan. He suffered severe injuries, including deep facial wounds that required reconstructive surgery. He lost sight in his right eye, but rather than being shaken by the experience, Larry brushed it off, joking that he would never have to worry about another crash because the odds of surviving two were practically impossible. But then, the impossible happened. On May 21st, 1995, Larry Hillblom took off from Pagan Island in his twin-engine seaplane. The weather was bad, the seas were rough, and the aircraft was poorly maintained. This time, he didn't come back. But his body was never found. Even in death, Larry remained an enigma. There were whispers. Did he really die, or did he disappear on purpose? Some claimed he staged his own death to escape the legal battles he saw coming. Others pointed to his reckless lifestyle, arguing that it was inevitable he would push his luck too far. Without a body, without definitive answers, the legend of Larry Hillblom only grew. From a broke college student in California to a billionaire businessman, from a pioneer in global shipping to a mysterious recluse, from an eccentric adventurer to a man whose disappearance left more questions than answers, Larry Hillblom's life was anything but ordinary. And in the end, he did what he had always done. He vanished. But this time, he never reappeared. On May 21st, 1995, the sun cast long golden streaks over the Pacific as Larry Hillblom climbed aboard his vintage seaplane. It was a well-worn craft, rickety, some would say dangerous, but Larry had always preferred things his way. The plane, like many of his possessions, was old, nostalgic, oddly neglected. He never sought a pilot's license, never worried about meticulous maintenance, and when questioned about it, he would simply shrug. That morning, he wasn't alone. His pilot, Robert Long, and his business partner, Saipan Congressman Jesus Mafnes, joined him. The trio planned to make the routine flight from Pagan Island back to Saipan. It should have been an easy trip, one they had done before. But this time, something went horribly wrong. Somewhere over the open ocean, the plane vanished. No distress calls, no mayday signals, just an eerie, deafening silence. As soon as the aircraft failed to arrive in Saipan, alarm bells rang. A frantic search and rescue mission was launched. Boats scrambled to the suspected crash site. Calls were made to the U.S. Navy and Air Force in Guam. Pilots scoured the horizon, scanning for any sign of wreckage, any glimmer of hope that survivors might be floating somewhere, waiting to be rescued. For nearly a day, nothing. Then, 2 private boats stumbled upon the debris, a mangled fraction of the plane bobbing on the waves. Wreckage was strewn across the water, a silent, haunting testament to whatever happened. The bodies of Robert Long and Jesus Mafnes were soon found. But Larry Hillblom? He was gone. Almost immediately, the search was called off. There was no extended effort to locate the missing billionaire. No deep-sea divers scouring the depths. Despite only a quarter of the plane being recovered, the authorities moved quickly to declare him dead. A death certificate was issued, the cause of death simply listed as unknown/lost at sea. And just like that, one of the wealthiest, most eccentric men in the world was officially gone. But was he? For those who knew him, doubt crept in. This was Larry Hillblom, the man who had a habit of vanishing, who had spent his life slipping away from places, people, and responsibilities. Was this really just an accident? Or had he pulled off the greatest disappearing act of all time? Then, as news of his death spread, a legal storm erupted. Larry had a will, but for a man as meticulous, intelligent, and calculated as he was, the document was shockingly sloppy. Hastily written and filled with loopholes, it left most of his fortune to medical research. But there was something curious. The will made no mention of any children. Strange, given the long-standing rumors that Larry had fathered several illegitimate children across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. He had always denied it, brushed off the accusations. But suddenly, women from multiple countries came forward claiming their children were his. And then things got even stranger. When investigators arrived at Larry's home in Saipan, they expected to find answers. Personal belongings, paperwork, something to confirm his life, his routine, his intentions. Instead, they found an empty shell. His home had been stripped of all traces of him. Every personal item that could hold DNA had been deliberately removed. His toothbrushes, combs, and hairbrushes, gone. His clothes, gone. His bathroom sinks, scrubbed with muriatic acid, a corrosive substance powerful enough to dissolve biological evidence. Someone had erased him entirely. The question was obvious. Who had orchestrated this? Was it the estate's lawyers, who had much to gain by keeping any illegitimate children from claiming a piece of Larry's billions? Or was it something more sinister? Had Larry anticipated these children coming forward, wiping out his own DNA to protect his fortune? Or had someone silenced him, ensuring he'd never contest their control over his estate? Because if there was no body and no DNA, then there was no proof of death and no proof of children. If there was no proof of death, was it possible that Larry Hillblom was still alive? At the time of his disappearance, Larry was living with his longtime girlfriend Josephine, a quiet woman who, despite the stark difference between them, had somehow captivated him. To outsiders, their relationship was baffling. Friends couldn't understand what drew him to her. Josephine spoke very little English, barely anything beyond the word no. And yet, from the moment they met, Larry was completely smitten. He seemed almost mesmerized by her presence. And before long, they were inseparable. But beneath the surface of their relationship, cracks began to form. Josephine was fiercely jealous. She was well aware of Larry's wandering eye, his reputation, and the whispers about other women. Women he met on business trips in other countries, in places she had never been. Her insecurity festered, driving her to desperate measures. One day, she took a black magic marker and scrawled her name, Josephine, onto all of Larry's underwear. It was a declaration, a warning to any woman who might come close. He was hers. Larry found it amusing, but he also understood her suspicions. After his first plane crash, an accident that nearly killed him, Josephine did something unexpected. She drafted a will and presented it to him, asking him to sign it. Larry refused, saying that if he signed it, she might want him dead. It was an oddly blunt response, almost joking, but it revealed something deeper. Larry knew how dangerous money could be. He wanted Josephine to worry about his well-being, not his wealth. But then, just 2 years later, he was gone. In the aftermath of his disappearance, Josephine was shattered. She had shared a life with Larry for 10 years, but now she was alone. She had no money of her own, no legal claim to anything, and nowhere to go. The life they'd built together was suddenly slipping away, piece by piece. And then the estate lawyers came knocking. They told her to get rid of everything, Larry's clothes, his possessions, any personal effects still left in the home. And whether she understood the full implications of what she was doing remains unclear, but in her fear and grief, she obeyed. She was terrified of being cast with nothing, so she did exactly what they asked. And then they turned on her. As legal battles raged, the absence of a body became a nightmare for those seeking to prove paternity. Without a corpse, there could be no DNA test. And because Josephine got rid of all DNA from their house, there was nothing to test. In the weeks that followed, Josephine became a target. The same legal team that instructed her to dispose of Larry's belongings suddenly changed their stance. They publicly discredited her, dismissing her as nothing more than a maid who had worked in Larry's house. Gone was the acknowledgement that she had lived with him for more than a decade. Gone was the recognition of their relationship. At the same time, the estate's lawyers launched a smear campaign against the women who had come forward with children. They painted them as prostitutes, implying that their claims of paternity were nothing more than extortion attempts. The objective was clear: to keep Larry's fortune locked up within the estate, away from anyone who might have a legitimate claim to it. But what the estate lawyers hadn't counted on was that none of these women were going to disappear quietly. The fight was just beginning. The women needed DNA, and in an unexpected twist, an unusual lead surfaced. Years earlier, after the near-fatal plane crash in 1993, Larry had undergone facial reconstructive surgery at the UCSF Medical Center. During that procedure, a facial mole had been removed and preserved. The mole was the only remaining piece of Larry's DNA. The UCSF Medical Center agreed, strangely and perhaps suspiciously, to relinquish the sample for testing. But skeptics questioned its authenticity. Could they trust that this was really Larry's tissue? UCSF had plenty to lose if the mole turned out to be a match for the children. Still, the legal teams pressed on. In a final desperate effort, attorneys sought to test Larry's living relatives. They turned to his mother, his brother, and his half-brother. And that's when things took another bizarre turn. They refused. They outright refused to submit their DNA for testing. But why? Were they protecting a family secret? Were they simply trying to avoid getting entangled in the legal battle? Or did they just want to keep his money for themselves? Eventually, Larry's mother took a $1 million payout for a single drop of blood to confirm DNA testing. The results? 4 of the 8 children who had come forward were proven to be his. Larry Hillblom, a man who had spent his entire life running, hiding, disappearing, had left behind more than just a fortune. He had left a legacy. When the dust settled, the battle for Larry's billion-dollar estate ended in a staggering payout. Lori Nguyen in Vietnam, Jillian Quartero and Mercedita Felician in the Philippines, and Larry Hillblom Jr. in Palau were officially declared his heirs. Each received approximately $50 million after taxes and legal fees. His living girlfriend Josephine received $3 million. The remaining $240 million of his estate was funneled into the Hillblom Foundation, which fulfilled his final wish, donating the money to UCSF for medical research. To this day, Larry Hillblom's body has never been found, but there are plenty of theories. There are those who believe Larry is truly gone, lost beneath the waves of the Pacific, taken by the very risk he had never seemed to fear. But others aren't so sure. His habits, his secrecy, the missing DNA, the eerie erasure of his identity. Did he orchestrate his own disappearance? Did he escape the legal battle he knew was coming, leaving behind the chaos of his past? Or was he silenced by those who stood to gain the most from his disappearance? The mystery of Larry Hillblom lingers like the wake of a lost plane over the ocean, stretching far beyond the day he was declared lost at sea. Without a body, without undeniable proof, one question will always remain. Did Larry really die that day? The simplest and most official explanation is that Larry died in that crash and that his body was simply lost to the ocean. The seaplane had suffered a mechanical failure, sending it plunging into the waves. The impact was violent enough to tear apart a significant portion of the aircraft, and given the remoteness of the location, Larry's body could have been pulled into the deep, carried away by the currents, never to be found. It's a plausible theory, but not a perfect one. Because while accidents happen, the circumstances surrounding Larry's disappearance weren't so straightforward. Why was the search so abruptly called off once the plane was found? Why was his body the only one missing? And then there's the matter of what happened after his disappearance. Because in the days that followed, things only got stranger. Larry was a billionaire recluse, a man with a tangled web of business dealings, secret affairs, and hidden enemies. He kept company with politicians, tycoons, and some very dangerous people. What if his death wasn't an accident? Consider this. Someone had an awful lot to gain from Larry's disappearance. The Hillblom estate, worth hundreds of millions, was suddenly up for grabs. His business partners had long been frustrated with his erratic decisions and growing paranoia. The lawyers controlling his estate worked aggressively to keep his fortune locked away from any potential heirs. The women he exploited, many of them underage girls from impoverished countries, had begun to speak out. Had someone decided that Larry was more valuable dead than alive? Some speculate that his own associates had killed him, perhaps even staged the plane crash to make it look like an accident. The timing was too convenient, the circumstances too unbelievable. And if that were true, who made the call? Who stood to benefit? Well, that's a long list. And what if he faked his own death? And this is where things get truly bizarre. Larry Hillblom wasn't just a man who kept secrets. He lived in secrecy. He avoided publicity, refused to have his photo taken, and traveled under aliases. He moved money through offshore accounts, set up businesses in the most obscure corners of the world, and had a deep distrust of government and financial institutions. What if Larry planned his disappearance? What if this was his final vanishing act? And here's why this theory isn't as crazy as it sounds. Larry was obsessed with his own mortality. He ate meticulously, avoided alcohol, and lived in constant fear of disease and aging. He was growing increasingly paranoid. Those around him noticed a change. He was erratic, suspicious, and even talked about wanting to disappear. The aftermath was too convenient. His body was never found. His house scrubbed clean of DNA, down to the toothbrushes, combs, even the drains. Someone made sure there was no way to confirm his death or the ensuing paternity. What if it was Larry who planned all of this? He had the resources, the knowledge, and the motive. He knew exactly how to disappear without a trace. He had plenty of business opportunities that were off the books. Could he have escaped to some remote island, a new identity, a quiet life away from the lawsuits and scandals that were about to come crashing down? There are whispers, unconfirmed sightings, strange stories, rumors that refuse to die. Some claimed that he slipped into Southeast Asia, where he had spent much of his time in the years before his disappearance. He had deep connections in Vietnam, the Philippines, Palau, and Indonesia. He could have assumed a new identity, living out his days in some forgotten coastal town, watching the world argue over his fortune while he quietly lived out his years in exile. If that were all true, is he still alive? Maybe. If Larry survived, he would be in his 80s today. Did he spend the rest of his life watching the chaos unfold from the shadows? Or did he die alone, his secret safe, his disappearance, the perfect final mystery? Larry Hillblom was a man full of contradictions. A billionaire who avoided the spotlight, a lawyer who left a messy will, a man obsessed with control who ultimately lost control of everything. His death or disappearance remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of modern times. Was it an accident, a conspiracy, a carefully crafted escape? To this day, nobody knows. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly how Larry wanted it. Saipan is a tropical paradise, a place where turquoise waters meet dense jungles, and where history lingers in the ruins of World War II. It's a destination that feels both remote and untouched, a place where you can still escape the fast pace of modern life. But, like any paradise, it comes with risks, some obvious, some hidden beneath the surface. Before you set foot on the island, it's important to understand the realities of safety in Saipan, from crime to the dangers of flying small aircraft, just as Larry did. Saipan is generally considered safe for tourists. Violent crime is rare, and most visitors never encounter trouble beyond the occasional sunburn or jellyfish sting. But that doesn't mean it's completely without risks. Property crime is more common than violent crime, with occasional thefts, vehicle break-ins, and rare but notable robberies. While major resorts are secure, certain areas, especially more secluded beaches or jungle paths, can be dangerous if you're alone or unaware of your surroundings. There have been cases where tourists were targeted in isolated areas. One particularly tragic incident in 2012, a Japanese tourist was murdered near a beach park, shocking the local community. While these crimes are rare, they serve as a reminder to stay vigilant, especially when venturing into less populated parts of the island. If you're visiting Saipan, basic safety precautions can go a long way. Avoid walking alone at night in unfamiliar areas. Keep your valuables locked in a safe at your hotel. And be cautious when using ATMs, especially at night. Rental cars are sometimes targeted for break-ins, so don't leave anything visible inside. While the island may feel laid back and welcoming, always trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, it isn't. Beyond crime, one of the greatest dangers in Saipan is also what draws many visitors to the island: adventure. The cliffs are stunning, but can be treacherous. The caves and lagoons are beautiful, but can be deadly if you don't know what you're doing. And then there's the sky. The exhilarating, lawless frontier, where small planes still take off without much regulation, just as Larry did. Larry's passion for flying vintage planes was part of what made him larger than life. He loved the thrill of freedom, the ability to go wherever he wanted, whenever he wanted. But the very thing that gave him that freedom may have also been what led to his disappearance. Small aircraft, especially older models, come with risks that most passengers don't fully appreciate until it's too late. Flying in a small plane is an entirely different experience from stepping into a commercial jetliner. Unlike the rigorously maintained, highly regulated world of commercial aviation, private and small aircraft operate under a patchwork of rules that vary from country to country. Some pilots maintain their planes meticulously following every safety protocol. Others, especially those who own vintage planes, may cut corners, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of arrogance. Larry himself was known to be more of a big-picture guy, someone who wasn't always concerned with the details, and that attitude extended to his planes. One of the biggest risks when flying in a small plane is maintenance, or lack thereof. In the U.S., the FAA requires annual inspections for general aviation aircraft. But once you leave the mainland, those rules can become murky. In some places, aircraft are barely inspected at all. In 2019, a World War II-era B-17 bomber crashed in Connecticut, killing 7 people. Investigators found that, despite the plane being a beloved historical relic, it hadn't been properly maintained, and a failure in its engines led to the deadly crash. Stories like this are more common than you might think. The experience of the pilot is just as important. A good pilot can make a split-second decision that saves lives. But not all pilots are equal. In 2015, a sightseeing plane crashed into a mountainside in Alaska, killing all 9 people aboard. The pilot had limited experience flying in the challenging weather conditions of the region, and his decision to continue the flight despite poor visibility proved to be fatal. When flying in a small plane, it's crucial to know who's at the controls. How many hours of experience do they have? How well do they know the aircraft? Have they flown this particular route before? These are the kinds of questions you should be asking. Another major risk with small planes is weather. Unlike commercial jets that can fly above the storms, small aircraft are far more vulnerable to sudden weather changes. In 1999, John F. Kennedy Jr.'s plane crashed off the coast of Martha's Vineyard after he lost control in poor visibility. He wasn't trained for flying in low light conditions without clear horizons, and tragically, he became disoriented. Saipan, like many tropical islands, is known for sudden weather shifts. One moment the sky is clear, and the next, a storm can roll in, reducing visibility to zero. Larry's final flight took off in clear conditions, but over the open ocean, weather can change in an instant. Flying over water brings its own unique dangers. If something goes wrong, there is nowhere to land. Unlike land crashes, where emergency services can respond quickly, a plane that goes down in the ocean leaves little chance for survival. In an emergency, every second counts. Small planes don't float for long, and getting out fast is critical. If you're ever on a small plane flying over water, wear a life vest and know exactly where the exits are. If something happens, don't wait for instructions. Act immediately. Larry had already survived one plane crash 2 years before his disappearance. That first crash should have been a warning, a moment to step back and reassess. But he didn't. He continued flying in the same way, taking the same risks, until one day, his luck ran out. So if you ever find yourself in Saipan and you're offered the chance to hop on a seaplane or take a ride in a vintage aircraft, think carefully. Not all flights are dangerous, but some are. And knowing how to spot the difference could be the key to making sure your trip doesn't become your last. Saipan is a place of beauty, adventure, and mystery. It's the kind of place that calls to those who crave something different, something off the beaten path. But like Larry, if you choose to step into this world, you have to be prepared for the unknown. Because in Saipan, the line between paradise and danger is thinner than you might think. And remember, no matter where you're traveling, make sure you inform someone about your plans before going anywhere. Tell someone reliable where you're going and what you'll be doing and when to expect you back. And my number one tip to staying alive on vacation is to pay attention to your gut. If something doesn't feel right, it isn't. Larry Hillblom was a billionaire, an eccentric visionary, and the man who seemed to live by his own rules. Then, one day, in 1995, he vanished without a trace. His body was never found. His estate became the center of a legal battle, and the circumstances of his disappearance remained shrouded in mystery. Was it really just an accident at sea? Was he murdered? Or did he stage his own appearance to escape the chaos that followed? The truth is still out there, and maybe someone knows what really happened. If you have any information, any leads, or have heard anything that could shed light on the disappearance of Larry Hillblom, reach out to us at The Last Trip. You can contact us through email at lasttrippodcast@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram at The Last Trip Crime Pod. Because some mysteries are never truly solved until the right person decides to speak. And finally, remember to leave a review and rate this podcast 5 stars if you like the show, or hell, even if you don't. But either way, feel free to let me know what you think. Please follow The Last Trip on Instagram at The Last Trip Crime Pod, and subscribe on Patreon to support the show. You'll get extra research, videos, photos, and updates, and even learn more about my personal travels. That's patreon.com/thelasttrippodcast. I'm Jamie Beebe, bringing you your last trip and signing off until the next one. Thanks for listening.